Last time we looked at whether or not the Jesus of faith is actually cliché Jesus or historical Jesus, and we determined that he was, in fact, historical Jesus, because he doesn't offer us a cliché version of peace, of this idea of world peace, which has become so much of a trope nowadays. Rather, Jesus offers us true peace. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the languages that were common in Jesus' day, you had Aramaic, which is the common language Jesus spoke. Then you had Hebrew, more of a formal language and the mother tongue. And then you had Greek. You have three words that come from each one of these three languages. And I'll also borrow from the Arabic word because it's so similar to the Aramaic word. You have shalom from the Hebrew, which means peace, but not just the absence of conflict. It actually means to be whole with someone, to have wholeness inside and wholeness in terms of your relationships. You have salam from the Arabic, but also similar to the Aramaic, which also has this connotation of reconciliation and wholeness. Then you have the Greek word irene, which also means the same thing, not just the absence of conflict, but to be set at one, to have this sense of reconciliation. That's really the peace that Jesus is offering. And that's not a cliche peace, because it starts with the vertical peace between God and man, and then can disseminate horizontally between human beings. It's not the absence of conflict. And how do I know that? Because you look at John chapter 14, verse 27, and you see that on the night before Jesus was betrayed, just hours before, he was to undergo unspeakable violence as a result of the increasing political and religious hostility and conflict that was brewing in his day. Jesus says to his disciples, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." It's interesting the way he says it. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. In other words, Jesus is saying the world has this cliche version of peace, which is simply the absence of conflict. And because he's about to undergo unspeakable violence, something that will resound throughout centuries in terms of what he endured, not only on the cross, but in the scourging that preceded it, he still has peace. He doesn't see it as an absence of violence or an absence of conflict. Rather, he has the peace. God the Son, made flesh, incarnate and dwelling amongst us, has the kind of peace because he has that relationship with God the Father and the Holy Spirit in that terms of being set at one, being whole. And he's offering this to his disciples. He's saying, this is the kind of peace I want to leave with you. Now, this is fascinating because not only is Jesus about to undergo unspeakable violence because of conflict, but his disciples in the years to come, because of their championing of his message and him as the one who is the Messiah, they will undergo unspeakable violence as well. Many of them will be martyred, or at least be willing to be martyred for their faith, or exiled. So Jesus is not talking about the absence of conflict. He's talking about being reconciled. And what is that reconciliation? Last time I hinted at it, that it has to do with us being made in God's image. You see, we're less than the heavenly beings, but we're more than mere animals, as Psalm 8 says. We are creatures that God regards and cares for deeply. We were created in his image. We reflect something of the divine splendor. We reflect something of the divine agency of creation and creativity and the ability to relate to the outside world with other minds. And we have that expressed between Adam and Eve and God in the Garden of Eden, that beautiful relationship. But it is marred by our rebellion and by our sin. And so true peace is restoration of that Edenic setting, but even better, because of our relationship with God being so disrupted, it is now set at one again through the cross. When we have that vertical reconciliation with God, if we take that seriously, if we understand that we are sinners in need of saving, and then we share that message that that saving actually has occurred, and then we live out that message with those around us, that can result in the horizontal reconciliation we so desperately need in our day. You know, I'm reminded of Thomas Bracken's poem, Not Understood. And he waxes eloquent about how it is that human beings go along in our relationships, not really understanding each other, and then our paths grow wider, he says, as the seasons creep. Along the years we marvel and we wonder why life is life, and then we fall asleep, not understood. And then he says this, "O God, that men would see a little more clearly, or at least judge less harshly when they cannot see. O God, that men would draw a little nearer to one another. Perhaps we would draw nearer to thee and then be understood. It's interesting that when we have that vertical reconciliation, when we finally understand ourselves in our sinful state, but in the fact that we are loved so deeply by God, that he came as a baby in a manger to fulfill a purpose, which is that reconciliation. When we have that vertical, perhaps then we can have the kind of peace Jesus was leaving us with, which is not only reconciliation of the vertical, but then a reconciliation we can have to the horizontal, to one another, and then maybe we can be understood. In the next and final installment, we'll talk about Jesus himself being the very embodiment of that peace we're so longing for.